stand by my oath, loyalty to wishes 3.
I'm kidding. Watch this.
It is my honor now to open this door for the moment the entire world has been waiting for.
Here we go.
Prepare for the best 2 years of our lives.
Stefan, please talk to me.
Is it a bit like a party? I think it is like a party. You need to find out.
I don't have time. I'm too busy doing your job.
What?
A normal person.
Yeah, a normal person.
What makes you a normal person?
Well, I don't believe in God.
I love it when he does that.
Did you just look at me? Look at me! How dare you! Close your eyes!
You're funny.
Yes, I am funny. Now is the time to choose a side.
There should be a big red button around here somewhere.
You can't choose who you're attracted to. You are who you are. Don't let anyone take that away from you.
What are your superpowers again?
I'm a computer engineer.
I hope you're ready for what comes next.
We have a job to do. You're coming with us.
No way. This guy's a real
I am human evolutionary change.
Pleasure to meet you, Mum. What do you think? Well, what do you know?
The name's Sherlock Holmes and the address is 221B Baker Street.
Bond. James Bond.
Cheers.
It's gonna be fun. We'll have fun with it.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Adrian Wotton. I'm the Chief Executive of the British Film Commission, and I'd like to welcome you to this special webinar under the Cannes Marché 2020 as part of the We Are UK Film programme. I'd love to say that we were sitting here in sunny Cannes on the Croisette, but despite not quite being down in the south of France, we are delighted to be part of the Marché and to welcome you for this very special seminar that's looking at the work that's been going on in the UK. Particularly, you've just seen a modest little showreel of the work that was going on in the UK before March this year. And what we're talking about today is particularly how the UK film and television industry is responding to getting back to work, to recovery plans and programs, and particularly around the guidance that we at the British Film Commission, working with industry, working with the UK government, has produced to assist that recovery and to get our film and television programs being made again in the UK. And today I have an array of special guests to talk to me and to talk to you about this guidance and the practical steps they're taking to apply that guidance, and also the training, health and safety measures that are being taken as part and parcel of that. What I'm going to do now is ask them to introduce themselves, say a little bit about what they do, and then I'll tell you a little bit more about how the guidance evolved, how we developed it and produced it, and then talk specifically to our guests about the practical measures they're taking and the real work they're doing on productions that they're working on right now to get back and start shooting again. So without any further ado, can I ask each of our panelists, perhaps starting with Sarah Jane, to briefly introduce themselves?
Hi, I'm SJ, and I'm the head of film and television physical production at Working Title Films. And we are very busy trying to get 3 or 4 productions back on their feet, which were all shut down just before the pandemic took hold.
Thank you, SJ. Chris?
Hi there, I'm Chris Fry. I'm an executive producer at an independent production company called Sister. Most recently exec produced Chernobyl and Giri Haji. We had 4 productions, 1 shooting and 3 in sort of deep prep when lockdown happened. So we're working hard as SJ is to try and get those 4 things back up and running as soon as we can.
Thanks, Chris. Now Gareth Ellis Unwin, the screen. You're muted, Gareth.
There was always going to be one of us that did that, wasn't there? Okay. So I'm Gareth Ellis Unwin. I'm the head of film and animation at ScreenSkills. For those that don't know the organisation, we're the UK charity to help enable those that want to come into the screen industries, or indeed are already in and want to progress in the screen industries. I was asked by both Adrian and the BFC and also Ben Roberts at the BFI to sit on a couple of the recovery groups that put the guidance together, and enjoyed being able to sort of reflect on my time as an independent producer and as a first assistant director to help try and shape and influence the guidance as it came together. ScreenSkills has been particularly busy over the last couple of months. We've been hosting a number of events to try and keep the filmmaking community engaged, and also give opportunity for those that had maybe a bit of unexpected time on their hands to do an additional pieces of training. And in that sort of realm of training, we will be releasing next Tuesday the COVID-19 basic awareness training that's been developed to support the guidance that's being created by the BFC. And we'll maybe talk about that a little bit later in today's session, but that's me.
Thank you, Gareth. Thank you, all of you. So in a second, I'm going to talk to all of you collectively about some of the practical elements of the guidance, the work that you're doing on specific productions, and also talk to Gareth exactly about the training programs that ScreenSkills is going to be rolling out. But before I do that, let me just give you a bit of context that, in terms of how we got here. Every one of the people on this panel inputted into the guidance, and I think that the British Film Commission, working with the BFI, working with the entire UK film industry, and actually a large chunk of the international film industry in the US and in Europe, worked with us. I mean, we embarked on the largest consultation exercise, I think, that any film and TV agency has ever done, both an employer's consultation, but a workforce consultation. And that's why the guidance, which I think will be available to you on a link, is so detailed, broken down department by department. And we were doing that over here with the industry and working very, very hard, taking information from wherever we could, from protocols that were being used in different territories or developed in different territories, but also getting very, very detailed input from a production subgroup that the British Film Commission brought together, that Gareth was part of, and also working with government, because this guidance very much is government guidance as well. It reflects all the government guidance and regulations as they relate to health and safety and protection against the COVID-19 virus and the pandemic that we have experienced, obviously, around the world, not just in the UK. And so what we had to do was fuse all this vast repository of industry information together with the actual information that we had from government about health, safety, cleansing, about social distancing. All of those different components had to be agreed, put into the guidance, and agreed with a whole array of government departments in the UK: Public Health England, the Health and Safety Executive, the Office of the Deputy Chief Medical Officer. Just about everyone in government in some way or another had to sign off the guidance, as we were also working with industry. And that was a long and exhaustive and exhausting process, but we did manage to publish the guidance on the 1st of June. The guidance is not something set in stone. It's a live document, and as new guidance comes out, and the UK government only issued new guidance on social distancing yesterday, we are adapting and developing that guidance. So the guidance remains on the British Film Commission website and others' websites, but it will change and evolve, and there will be a new version of the guidance coming out actually relatively rapidly that will reflect the changes that the government regulations have made. So it is something that you can constantly refer to. It's not something that's going to go out of date. And that guidance is also complementary to guidance that was produced by the broadcasters for different kinds of unscripted, factual entertainment shows, and also links to guidance that was specifically produced for visual effects and post-production by the UK trade body. So there's a suite of complementary guidance. And what we also did was, liaising with the nations and the regions, we also produced a specific set of guidance relating to locations and reflecting the differences between our devolved governments in the UK. So where there is a difference between Scotland and Wales, the guidance actually reflects those differences so that it's appropriate for use in Scotland, it's appropriate for use in Wales and England and Northern Ireland. So it is sophisticated in that sense, and it's tailored and adapted to the particular local and regional circumstances. And it encompasses broadcast over there, it encompasses scripted drama, film and high-end television, which is what we're primarily going to concentrate on today, and also visual effects and post-production and working in studio and on location. So that's the context of the guidance and some of the detail about how it came about. So what we need to do now is actually talk about its applicability, because one of the things that we're very keen at the British Film Commission to do is ensure that people understand how to use it, understand its scalability, and learn how to work with it, and what that means in terms of planning, preparation, training, and what it means in terms of costs. And these are all the issues that our panelists are grappling with on a day-to-day basis. So I think what I'd like to do is start by asking the panel collectively about, in terms of applying the guidance, and you've all inputted into it, you've all read it, you're all using it to a certain extent. What, particularly in terms of, let's start with planning and preparation, what impact is applying new health and safety principles along the lines of the guidance having, first SJ and then perhaps Chris and Gareth, please chip in, what impact is it having on your planning and preparation for the projects that you mentioned?
Well, certainly, you know, there was always on every production, I'm sure everyone who works in production will agree, there was always an element of kind of organized chaos going into a production and kind of last minute scramble. And that is sadly a thing of the past. We categorically cannot go in like that. It has to be planned with almost military precision now. So we have introduced this new area that is budgeted and scheduled, which is, we're seeing it's a 4-week COVID planning R&D period, where we have a small core group of HODs, where we are literally going through every page of the script, every day of the schedule, and addressing each day in terms of what the risks are. And certainly on all 3-4 productions, we've had to make quite significant changes. Things like we were shooting on location in Soho. We're now actually building on a set in Pinewood, and we start shooting on the 26th of July. We're building now. We've got our teams up there. We've got our COVID coordinator, which we all know now. COVID supervisors is a whole new area of the budget, which is incredibly expensive, but incredibly necessary. So, you know, we are, obviously there is quite a significant budget impact as well that we're finding at the moment. Now, as you said, Adrian, the guidance and what we're doing, you know, we're writing a risk assessment for each production. And obviously one size doesn't necessarily fit all, and each production has their own specific controls that are required. And we're adapting things are changing on a daily basis. We are taking a very, very cautious approach at this stage and are pretty much sticking to the guidelines like glue. And I think in some cases we're going over and above, particularly in terms of protecting our cast. You know, there's one film we have, which it's an 8-day reshoot. We have a release date. We have to hit the release date. We cannot afford for that film to go down in any way, shape or form. So, and already we're way over budget because of what's happened. So we're being particularly protective. You know, we are putting cast in hotels, and we are sequestering them for the life of their shooting, which, as anyone can imagine, is very expensive. And some key HODs, shooting crew members. We're adopting the pods, which is working very well. We're encouraging remote workers, we call them Pod H, which is Pod Home, to continue where they can. Some people, you know, in the production department, props buys, those kind of people who are working really effectively from home, we're encouraging them to continue working on that basis. So yeah, it's a whole new normal for all of us. What I will say on a very positive note is it's quite impressive how much our crew have already adapted to the new way of working. And at the moment, we've had absolutely no resistance to testing, to temperature checking, to wearing PPE. We did actually do a small shoot a couple of nights ago, and it was a plate shoot. It was in the early hours of the morning, very small crew, very hot, very humid, all wearing PPE. It went a little bit slower, of course, because it just does, because you're cleaning down equipment all the time. But we did it, and we turned the camera, which felt like an enormous sense of achievement, considering what we've all been through over the last few months, where you know, we were like, will we ever get back to doing what we all love so much? So that was wonderful. You know, some crew are, you know, obviously concerned about their health and safety in terms of if they're going home with people that are shielded. So we are offering our crew who aren't being overnighted, if they are worried about going home and worried about going home and being safe, we're offering them accommodation, because what we have to enter into with all of the crew and all of the cast is a mutual agreement that we will protect you and you protect the production. We're lucky in that all of those productions did have existing insurance policies, which will cover, God forbid, any further kind of COVID interruption or shutdown. We are looking ahead with productions at the moment that obviously at the moment are facing no insurance whatsoever, which is very worrying, but the wheels, I understand, are turning there as well. So yeah, we're busy and it's good, and crew want to come back to work. They are taking on board all the guidelines, all the mandates, all the protocols we're putting on board, and we're really hoping for a very safe and happy shoot.
Thank you, SJ. That's that awful lot there to come back to, because you've made a lot of important points. But I'm gonna ask Chris to unmute himself and sort of, in a sense, Chris, can you talk about some of the similar kind of issues that you're facing as you're beginning to plan? Because there's SJ's talked, you know, about cost, health and safety and well-being of the crew, testing, lots of things to come back to. But perhaps you can share your current experiences.
Yeah, I mean. First and foremost, I think the guidelines are excellent and a really sort of proactive, positive thing that I think everyone in the industry was sort of desperate to get, and it was, you know, fantastic to get that on the 1st of June. And as you said before, Adrian, you know, they are guidelines, and often a lot of the television shows we're making with co-producers. So, for example, something I'm involved in is with HBO and Sky, so we have to use the BFC guidelines as well as the HBO guidelines as well as the Sky guidelines, so we have to sort of fold them all in together and create one set of guidelines. Also, I think as we've said, the guidelines are guidelines, and every production has its own, will find its own unique set of challenges that they have to try and overcome. So it's about starting off in a sort of generic, filmmaking process guidelines, and then trying to adapt to the various specific things we need to do. I mean, before a month or so ago, we did a sort of editorial process of going through the scripts and looking at each scene in detail and working out, which scenes caused us, problems from a COVID point of view, whether it's a social distancing point of view, whether there was any intimacy, crowd scenes, just to try and get a sense of how big a problem we were going to have, because I think if you look at, say, in episode 1 for one of the things I'm doing, actually only about 50% of the scenes were a problem. So that I took as a real positive step. And I think it's about, now as SJ's doing, we're getting into a planning stage with the key HODs to really look at it in detail and go, right, with these 50% of the problem scenes, how are we going to address those specific needs? We are an industry of incredible problem solvers, and we overcome many, many complicated and difficult, challenging environments we have to film in. And this is our greatest one ever, probably. First and foremost, safety and health and safety of not just physically but mentally of the crew and cast is paramount. So that has to be the thing we think about first and foremost. And there's the human element of people reacting to this thing very differently. Some people are much more confident about getting back, and some people aren't. And I think different personnel on different productions are all slightly different. There's a different dynamic on each of the shows that we're doing. And I think it's about getting all of the crew into the same mindset, and we have to all work together at getting us back into production. And I believe the spirit is there. And as SJ has said, that she's got really positive experiences. But we have to be clear that we have to be do it with a good sense of humour and make sure that everyone buys into the protocols that are going to be in place for the foreseeable future.
And Chris, just to follow up, because I think you're both saying, both you and SJ are talking about the health and well-being of the crew, which is obviously critical. We make reference to that in the guidance, and obviously the film and television charities doing work around this as well. But also, I think that time, money. I'm sure we'll come back to money, but time. I'm presuming that you're also building in a significant additional period of pre-planning into the productions you're working on now.
Yeah, so we're working with collaboration and very closely with the broadcasters. Like I said earlier, many shows have got 2 or 3. So for example, HBO and Skyline are one thing I'm doing at the moment. We're working in, it's extremely collaborative and supportive. We are building in a 3-week planning period before a 6-week sort of break to then deal with legal, financial elements that we're going to have to do with approvals from our buyers and our broadcasters. And then we're adding 25% to prep and the shoot. And that is just a guide that we've discussed with HBO and Netflix. There seems to be about a 20 to 30% increase in prep and shoot that we're estimating that will be needed. So it's hard to be specific on that. And I think part of the planning stage, we'll get a first AD in to come and properly schedule those the scripts and a plan of how we achieve them. We'll be much clearer at that point, but we're not quite there yet. SJ, I think, is a little bit further ahead, probably.
Thank you, Chris. I'll come back to you in a minute, but Gareth, if we can get you to unmute yourself and perhaps talk about, because obviously the other 2 panelists have talked about all kinds of things in terms of health and safety, well-being of the crew. SJ also talked about the critical work around COVID coordination that we make explicit reference to in the guidance. Could you talk about how ScreenSkills is developing its program so it can reflect these issues in terms of the training you're providing?
Well, firstly, we're obviously on the inside of the development of the guidelines, having sat on a number of the groups. We're also sort of learning as we go. So I actually was on set 3 weeks ago of a shoot that the NFTS had put together as a test shoot, and got to witness firsthand working under the guidance. It's not fun wearing full PPE. It does move slower. It was really interesting to hear both SJ and Chris talk about the establishment of protocols within certain departments and how each department will have their own unique take on their own challenges. What's, you know, it'll come as no surprise, but I think what I took away from the test shoot was just how some of those really simple things to do on a film set actually became much more problematic. So everyone had thought about, how does the crew arrive? How do we adopt a one-way system through the studio site? What do we do about the pinch points of, you know, taking the temperature checks or feeding crew or breaks? But it was things like changing the batteries in a radio pack on the actress that suddenly, instead of being a 2-minute thing that the sound assistant would do really quickly behind a bit of set, turned into quite a rigmarole as things were waved with UV wands passed over and stuff. So I think it's the, you know, the big ticket items that everyone's very keenly aware of, but it's also just the smaller functional things. And what we're going to be doing, apart from rolling out the basic awareness training on Tuesday, and I'll probably talk about that in a bit more detail, is then start to run these sessions alongside industry as we start to see productions go back in. Because I think what's really important, and SJ talks to this really eloquently, there is a social contract between both the production company and the crews that are making the shows, that they will keep each other safe and protected. But likewise, as an industry, you know, if people are at the vanguard of shooting, then it would be really helpful to be learning from those experiences, finding out what worked, finding out what didn't work. So we have a series of 6 sessions planned through July and August, where we're going to be inviting practitioners that are either back at work or near to going back into work to come and talk, you know, to our audience about some of those challenges, both the big and the small, everything from the radio packs to the how do you manage a 100-strong crew. So those sessions are going to be very important. But the thing that's going to roll out first, which is next Tuesday, and I can now sort of give it a date with confidence, that next Tuesday the COVID-19 basic awareness training will be available through ScreenSkills. It's a 40-minute e-learning module that people can take, and there's a test at the end. The test at the end does have a pass or fail requirement, and successfully passing that piece of training will generate a certificate that the likes of Chris and SJ can ask for crew to supply a copy when they book them onto their shows. So that's the first thing that's out the traps next Tuesday, is this piece of basic awareness training, and that will launch on the ScreenSkills website. Then there's the subsequent sessions, and Chris and SJ, I know we live our lives by Zoom at the moment, but if I could possibly encourage you to come and play a part in some of those sessions of feeding back what has worked and what hasn't worked. Sorry, that's a very public way of putting you on the spot, don't mean to, but I think, look, we all went into this as an industry together, and we're going to come out of it and survive and thrive by coming through it together and being collegiate in our work.
Thank you, Gareth. And can I just go back to SJ, because one of the things you did mention, one of the number of things you mentioned was testing, and obviously we refer to testing in the guidance, but we're not, because this is guidance, and exactly we know that every production has to create its own risk assessment, and you're very good advice that every production should create its own risk assessment going forward now. But what we're aware of is that whilst we haven't, because our government guidance isn't, we haven't been prescriptive about testing, it does seem that lots of film and television productions are adopting one testing regime or another, and actually are going much further than anything we're necessarily suggesting in our guidance. Perhaps you could talk about testing a little bit and what you're doing.
Right. Well, we have one shoot starting on the 26th of July. We have one shoot starting on the 31st of August, confirmed for the 26th, TBC, but looking more and more positive for a TV show on the 31st of August. And we also have a film that we are in discussion with, because again, that was one that went down just before shutdown, and went down when we locked down, and it's come back in a different guise, because we are now putting it entirely on a resident location and a bubble, and it's the safest way to do it. But obviously it has significant costs, so at the moment we're in conversation with financiers about whether they'll back that cost. So God willing, that happens. And on all 3 productions, we have assumed that we need to ensure for the production and for obviously the health and well-being of everybody involved in the production, that every single crew member that is required to come to the site will be tested prior to starting work. So they are declared fit for work and virus-free. We've just done our first round of testing, and I'm very happy to say they all came back negative. We're using a fantastic company called Feature Medical, who are providing all of our testing and our swab teams, because as I'm sure many people know, at the moment the tests are quite invasive and uncomfortable and need to be done properly. So we are getting crew members to come to our site, and they're booked in for an individual swab test, and then they drive themselves, or if they don't, we provide them transport in a very safe way. And then they go home and we get the results. And the first results we had were turned around super quick. We got them within 48 hours. And so those people were all declared good and fit to come to work. So that was kind of 7 days out from them starting their period of employment. In terms of our shooting pod, we've got a setup where we're saying it's the stage, then we've got our A pod and our B pod. Our A pod are anyone that's in very close contact with the actors, and the B pod, while they're still on the set, are able to maintain a physical distance. They will all be tested 3 times a week, because we just need to put a ring of steel around that production and around the cast. We've got very limited windows with the cast. Because of the interruption, they are booked onto other films and have other commitments, so we have a very limited window with them, so we need to be very, very cautious. And rolling out going forward, we were thinking 3 times a week, but having had a very long conversation with an epidemiologist in America last night, the advice was testing any more than once a week for your shooting crew and cast may be unnecessary. So we were thinking 3 times a week for the next 2 shows, but we may well now be reviewing that, like reviewing the guidelines. We're reviewing it continuously on each day, and we may go to just once a week, but we will be continually testing. Okay. Hopefully in the rollout, I mean, I heard last night that potentially by autumn there will be a reliable spit test, which will be a real game changer for all of us. Because it just turn around things a lot quicker. But yeah, we fully intend on testing. We also are asking our crew, and in fact they're going to be signing a couple of pieces of guidelines that will be attached to the crew contract, which they will be maintaining a kind of health check before they come to work. So if they have any symptoms of any nature whatsoever, they'll be encouraged to stay at home and not to come to work under any circumstance. And if they do believe that they are at risk, we will get them tested as quickly as possible. Mm-hmm. The other thing we're introducing, which I'm sure a lot of people are, is really to discourage anybody coming to work. Having had periods of months of unemployment, and as we all know, unfortunately, there's been a big part of our industry have fallen through the cracks of any kind of financial help. We are building into our contract a kind of up to 2 weeks isolation payment, which will be their regular weekly wage. So the crew don't need to worry that they're not, oh, I don't feel well, but I need to earn the money, I'm going to come to work. We are actively, telling our crews, don't come, you'll be paid, you'll get tested, it's all okay.
Thank you. That's very informative and helpful. And on the testing, it's interesting because certainly when we've heard from Public Health England and the people who are involved with the elite sport and the Premier League, they seem to have adopted that once a week testing regime as well, saying that that's probably the most effective. So that chimes absolutely with what I'm certainly hearing in other quarters. And Chris, have you yet made plans about testing in the context of your forthcoming productions?
We're not quite as far as advanced as SJ, but we are talking about a similar sort of testing regime. It's certainly around the specific actors. There's various. One of the things I'm doing is it's a quieter character piece, but there needs to be gentle intimacy. You know, we need the character to kiss on the cheek or to touch the hands because that it's a love story. They need to be able to, you know, so we, you know, do we have to work out how we try and test around that? Or we've also talked about, you know, quarantining, you know, shooting those scenes, those specific scenes during a period of time and quarantining those specific actors for a period of time before and after. But we're talking about similar things. I think the other things that we've got questions around are, you know, extras, not large numbers of extras, but extras that often work on multiple jobs, how we test around that. Guest actors that often may do a day or two on one job and then come and do a few days on another job. You know, how do we share test information with other productions? You know, there's data protection issues with that. And then also the bigger thing is what happens when someone key fails that test. Then you're into a shutdown, so you know, potential shutdown if it's a key member of cast or crew. So you know, not wanting to be optimistic, obviously always, but there is that chance of that happening. So it's what we do then, I suppose, is a bigger question that we're trying to figure out with our broadcasters.
Thanks, Chris. Gareth, just coming back to you, and you, I think everyone has talked about not just health and safety, but the well-being. It was very interesting to hear SJ talking about how they're you know, how they're structuring their contracts and also the payments. But I'm also thinking that I don't know that I know there's always communication is absolutely critical on sets, but this seems to be a game changer in another way, that there's got to be, and SJ and both Chris are referring to, there's got to be a lot more transparency of communication between the crews and the cast. There's got to be a far more collaborative openness, whether it's about people being responsible for their own health and literally declaring they're not fit to work and staying at home for their protection and the protection of their fellow crew members, or it's just that feeling able to say, I am nervous, I am concerned, I do feel worried about that. Gareth, that seems to be a really, I mean, that's not training, it's more of a cultural element of how sets are going to operate.
Well, I think there's a couple of points in that. I mean, firstly, as SJ and Chris have mentioned, a lot of productions I'm talking to are asking for an enhanced sense of honesty from the crews that they're working with. And it is, like SJ said, if you've been out of work for a period of time, you might have quite a strong financial driver to be getting back to work. But it comes back to that social contract between the crew, the production, and the wider sort of society that you might interact with. I mean, pretty much every production is asking for a declaration of health, whether that's an online form or something that's physically signed and turned into production. That seems to be a very important aspect to it. I think one aspect which is really important is in the establishment of setting the productions up, that the risk assessment also reaches as far as enforcement and also lines of reporting, because people might not feel comfortable if they observe some less than ideal behaviour, either talking to the individual that's doing that, like they might be sort of handling something that they're not supposed to be handling, or being in a place they're not supposed to have. So I think it's really important as part of the risk assessment to establish enforcement and sort of reporting lines, and sometimes that's direct through line management. I think one thing that everyone was pretty much agreed on is that there didn't seem to be the need for some form of national whistleblowing helpline or something. You know, it was felt that this really needed to be managed within the productions, within the commissioning parties, you know, within the shows. And it wasn't just about the reporting and governance side of things. It was also just trying to make productions feel that they had discretion, and that they could, in all facets of the guidance, be able to show their own discretion based on their own particular needs of that production. But one thing that I think I've been always keen to underline, and to SJ's point about adaptability, okay, this is a pretty seismic thing that's happened to all of us, but film and filmmaking or program making quite often has decided to go into challenging environments. You know, anyone that's worked in a real prison filming, or anyone that's worked at an airport, knows that there are, for a reasonable period of time, adjustments that the crew needs to take, you know, whether that's how well resourced a department is when they're the other side of customs in an airport, or the other side of security when they're working in a prison. So you know, most people that are in this game are really adaptable, intuitive, you know, entrepreneurial in their thinking, and it's about encouraging the people within the productions, within the different departments, don't become siloed and defensive, or actually sort of, again, have that sort of collegiate approach to problem solving. Because it might be that, you know, someone who works in sound needs help and support from costume to hide a plant mic, or help from makeup to plant a mic in a wig or something. And that is going to create moments where different bits of equipment and personnel will have to sort of move amongst the pot. So yeah, I think there is a behavioural stroke cultural change. I mean, one of the biggest things I've heard is that what used to be that sort of maelstrom of activity where everyone wants to rush on set and do all of their work all at the same time, and you've got the first AD desperately trying to sort of marshal people in and out, that's going to become a lot more coordinated. To SJ's point, it's almost a military precision. You know, different departments will go in order, do their work, and then clear. So as an ex-first AD, I'm quite liking the sense that a working set might become a more ordered place.
Thanks, Gareth. And going back to SJ, we talked, it's been touched on a couple of times, but apart from the pre-planning side of it, and the time that you're now building in on every production, you mentioned that it's more tiring for the crew that are wearing PPE, etc. So I'm also presuming that part of the cost, you know, the budget running, the extension of cost, is also that it's going to take more time to shoot per se. You've got to build more time in because the crew gets more tired doing certain things, and you have to spend longer, not just preparing to do something, but actually doing it.
Definitely. And I mean, just from turning up to work, parking in a distance from another crew member, walking to the check-in point of getting your temperature taken. Say someone has a temperature that's spiked above the level we've set, which is I think 37.2. They'll be asked to wait for 20 minutes to see, and then they'll have their temperature checked again. That may be the DP, you know, so that's going to already cause some delays. We're trying to put enough personnel and crew in place in our COVID team to ensure a kind of swift go through in terms of the checking in the morning. But also then to lunch, you know, it's you know, there is no communal food. Everything is boxed. Everything is handed out individually. So we haven't quite done the lunch run yet. We've got ideas of how we're going to do it and how we do it as quickly as possible, but we're yet to do it. I'll come back and let you all know how the first day went. We are saying at the moment, we're saying absolutely no overtime because, you know, we need time before the start of the shooting day and at the end of the shooting day to do some antiviral fogging on the sets to clean everything down. So we need that extra time in the day to do that. And, you know, the type of films we make often rely on overtime to kind of make the day because we're always cramming in, to be honest with you, the schedule to get as much as we can for as low amount of money as possible. And the other thing that's going to cost, you know, to cause a big kind of time delay and the set just won't be as efficient is, you know, your pod C, which are sitting outside the set, which are made up of various parts of the electrical team, grip team, set dressing. If something is required to be changed or you're swinging a lens, we've got to clear the set completely. We bring in pod C, they do their thing, we sanitize, they go, we bring the shooting crew back in. So we have noticed, I mean, each one's slightly different, but like Chris said, it's about between, I would say, an average of 25% increase in just the schedule itself, which of course then has its related costs.
Yes, and obviously the cost question is a significant one. And I know, again, there's liaison going on with government departments, ourselves and the BFI have been looking at, and it's really important to capture this information because I think it's a reality that people, the fact that pre-planning time, there has to be more of it, there has to be more time actually shooting it for all the reasons you've described. So there is a significant additional cost. And ironically, I think that, and I'm sure you and Chris would agree with this, is that what we're finding is that the bigger the budget, actually the less the cost is, because they've already got more personnel available, more schedule, more resource. And so it may be as low as 9 or 10% as an additional cost on a huge budgeted, a Jurassic World that is going to restart production at Pinewood soon. But as you said, could be 29 or 30% on a more modestly budgeted feature film.
Yes, and you know, and I do know a little bit about that particular film, and I have friends and colleagues, and you know, a film like that will not go into a schedule just relying on, you know, some 2 or 3 days a week where you're doing some overtime, because you can't actually afford that extra 2 days or whatever it is. So you're building that in. They're not doing that. They as I understand it, their schedule has not significantly increased, if at all, because they're going into each day knowing that that's a manageable day, and they're allowing for whatever has to happen throughout that day. Whereas, yeah, it's very different. And so you're absolutely right. The sort of medium to low budget movies are at the moment suffering quite a big hit to the overall finances of the movie. And God willing, we are going to continue to make those types of movies, but you know, we are having to make other compromises, creative compromises in terms of scale, to try and mitigate some of those costs as well, because that's where the whole planning, you go, this was our baseline pre-COVID, this is what this movie cost, this is now our baseline with COVID, with everything we have to implement. And you know, it's the numbers have been really high, and so we I mean, particularly on one, we had to kind of work with the director to think of different ways to shoot certain scenes where we could try and mitigate and reduce some of the cost to allow for the increase in schedule, the COVID unit, the testing, the PPE, and all the other elements that we've now had to build in.
And Chris, I know you're at an earlier stage, but you said you were estimating at potentially 25%. Is that because the budget of the television dramas that you're looking at are in that sort of medium size? They're not the highest end, and they're not the lowest end domestic television.
Yeah, exactly. You know, that's exactly the reason. I think things like it's hard, isn't it, to quantify the cost sometimes, because I think obviously everything's going to take longer. And as Gareth alluded to, you know, we as an industry are used to having to work in challenging environments, you know, but we've all been there where there's only one access lift to the 35th floor, and there's a military plan for the one day that you're there. This is every day of the shoot we've got a plan. So it just communication, it's just everything is going to be slower. And as we mentioned about lunch, you know, it's all very well, I'd love to sit outside and have my lunch today, but when we're going into these shoots in the winter, when the autumn winter, it's going to be much harder to then manage. And you know, there's a big hit on locations. I think locations in the guidelines, there's a massive emphasis on them and how they service a unit, you know, in terms of being able to put a canteen together for the crew that's socially distancing. You know, if you're in an urban environment, it's hard to find that sort of space. It's easier if you're further away and you can put a marquee up with heaters and things like that, but there's a big emphasis on location. So that alone is, you know, we're looking at almost having a COVID unit manager, you know, that's having just sort of there just to potentially look at how they can service the crew and park everyone, and, you know, and keep the location team more creative. You know, I think also there's been quite a lot of talk about VFX and how that can help solve a lot of the problems. I think it can help solve the problems, but it's going to cost more. You know, it costs more, it takes more time. So, you know, it's hard to quantify. You know, things like one of the shows I'm doing, we had 5 days shooting in France. We could recreate it in the UK, but it's going to cost the art department a lot more. So, you know, you have to work out what's the best thing to do. So there's lots of those sorts of choices. And they're decisions and choices that we're all used to making. But there is cost is a big question in terms of how we maintain the quality of what we're trying to do in the time allowed with the stories and, you know, stories we want to tell.
No, absolutely. I mean, I think the thing is that the good news that I'm getting, the positivity from you and from SJ and from Gareth, is that you are used to, notwithstanding the fact that time is money, absolutely in this context, is that you're already planning and using the ingenuity and the creativity that you can to do that scaling and that work to get the things made, and that's, for me, from the British Film Commission point of view, is very encouraging, notwithstanding the scale of the obstacles you're having to overcome. And I know we touched on insurance. I don't talk about this too much, but I think that everyone's raised the question of insurance, and in case it comes up, in terms of from the audience watching this, what I can say is that the industry's worked very closely with the broadcasters, the PACT, the Producers Association here, and we have submitted detailed proposals to government about insurance cover and how insurance cover, particularly for television and film at particular levels, which doesn't necessarily affect the highest end film and television, and those that have some existing cover, can be provided with some kind of insurance cover. And although we don't have any outcome of that yet, I can say that it is being actively considered and discussed by government. They do realise the problem it has landed. So I'm just keeping my fingers crossed. I think all of us are keeping our fingers crossed that they are listening to us, I think, in terms of, and I know that, companies like Working Title have been submitting information on this as well. And so I think the government really is taking that particular challenge, as well as supporting us on the guidance, as well as looking at costs, are taking the insurance issue very seriously. I'm aware we've only got 5 minutes left, and I don't know whether we have any questions from our virtual audience out there that I should be fielding that we haven't covered, or indeed if there is anything else in this sort of last 5 minutes that we have, whether there's anything else that any of our panelists feel that I should have asked them about that I haven't asked them about yet. Whether, SJ, there's anything else you want to add, or Gareth you'd like to add, or Chris, because please feel free in the last few minutes we have.
I mean, interestingly enough, in the Q&A chat, there's a lot of discussion around insurance. And I think, everything you said, Adrian, at the heart of creating the guidance was trying to display, good practice that could be then used to hopefully encourage government to help in areas where just being better at what we do isn't going to get us the success we need. What I'm quite keen to continue to point out to people is that it is actually only the uninsured losses associated with this particular disease that's uninsured. Most insurers will still cover for loss and damage, for public liability, employers' liability, etc. It's just the unique nature of those uninsured losses that are attributable to this particular communicable disease. What I hope is a hopefully positive comment is that this is a period of adjustment. This isn't how we're going to be working in a year's time, hopefully, and the picture is emerging to be better as weeks and months go by. So hopefully we will see government lending its support, and we'll also see a sort of diluting of this horrible bug over time. So I think it's really important that we recognise that this is a period of adjustment, but it is a window of time rather than forevermore.
Thanks, Gareth. Anything else, SJ or Chris, you want to add practically, or anything you feel I've missed asking you?
No, I have to say, I think you've covered everything very well, Adrian. I feel that everything that I wanted to add, I feel that you've covered. So that's great. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree. No, totally. Yeah, we're all in it together, and we'll get through it, and we'll get to the other side. It's been good.
Yeah, I think we'll all come back stronger, as Gareth was saying, and I think, during this time that, everybody's creativity has been extraordinary, everybody's thinking, it just, I'm sure we've all had moments where we've kind of groaned about going to work or an early start on a set, and I have to say, I think people are going to stop that, because what's made us all realise is that what a great industry we're in, and thank God it's still surviving.
No, and I think that's a very important way to round this up. I mean, I'm obviously pleased from our point of view that with all your support and help, we managed to publish the guidance. You're using the guidance, adapting the guidance, and going back to work and employing people and making films and television programs. And that, I know that when the guidance was published, the studios reopened their doors and started working. And but it's obviously really critical from our point of view that it's not just the studio films. It's fantastic that they're up and running and the high-end television, but the work that you're doing at Working Title, the work that you're doing at Sister Pictures is coming back, and you are overcoming with all that ingenuity and that creativity to make films that the public will absolutely want to see and hopefully get to see back in cinemas as well as on television and streaming as the cinemas start to reopen next month. So I'm going to end this on a very positive note by thanking all of you for your contribution to the industry, but also your contribution to this session, because I know that people will find this very useful. And thank you as well to Gareth, because what ScreenSkills are doing, providing all this training and information is so critical as well to this whole process. So I'm really grateful for that. So thank you all very much, and you know, good luck. And thanks to everybody for joining us on this session, which I think will also be on YouTube and also be available on the We Are UK Film website for people who haven't managed to dial in today. So you can spread the word if people want to get these really useful, very practical information from our special guests. So thank you very much, SJ. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Gareth. Thank you, the Marché, and thank you, We Are UK Film. And have a great rest of afternoon and evening.
Brilliant. Stay safe, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.